5 fois par an, demander la charité. Quand même si c'est une patate des gâtons, 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 gâtons. Capitaine, voyage ton flag, allons c'est l'autre prochain. Demandez la charité aux autres musulmans.
I've been a historian for at least 25 years. I've been interested in history ever since I was a child and listening to the elders tell stories. And as for the tales of haunts and ghosts and such in the Low Country area, the area is full of them. Right now, we are by the statue of NOIVD, a man who tried to unsuccessfully to lead the African Americans in Charleston area to fight for their freedom, literally in a slave rebellion of 1822. But unfortunately, he was caught and executed. One of his comrades was a man known as Gullah Jack Pritchard. Gullah Jack was what was known as a conjurer or sorcerer, if you will, who used the people's beliefs in ghosts and spirits to encourage them to join NOIVD's unsuccessful revolution. And he would use that belief to get African Americans who still believed in such things to join his revolt by saying that these haints and spirits would attack them if they didn't join his revolution.
Gullah Jack came from the Angola tribe of people. The Golas, the Angolas and the Dongolas were very, very powerful spiritually, and they were very, very independent. So they did not really like to be captured. Most of the people, when it was that time to testify against Gullah Jack, refused to testify. They were willing to die physically than actually cause harm to this man, because they know in the spiritual realm, he was just as powerful as he is on the physical realm.
Beyond Gullah culture and beyond African Americans, you know, folks who may be Southern or Native whites talk about ghost stories. I mean, throughout Charleston today, you can take a ghost tour. But I think there's a uniqueness when you bring in the word hank or haunt because of the Africanism that's there. That's the central part that we want folks to understand. That's a part of our culture, a part of our legacy. As we came across on enslaved ships, that tradition, that knowledge, that experience, that know-how, that connectivity also came.
I don't really use the word haint. I use the word hag because it really, I think, connects a lot deeper with the African spiritual world when it comes down to that. When you talk about haint, you're just like explaining a malevolent energy, okay? But when you talk about a hag, now you actually personify that energy.
Dr. Lorenzo Dow Turner, who was the first African-American who studied Gullah culture seriously, he recorded a number of ghost stories and haint stories from his informants. He recorded a story from Mary Smalls of nearby Johns Island, who said that a haint tried to attack her on several occasions, and the haint changed into a cat and a bird as well as a cow, I believe, and by making different noises.
It can shape-shift, it can actually shed its skin, it can attach itself to a different person, it can be a person.
Gullah culture and language, there's a variation, whether you're on James Island, whether you're in Mount Pleasant, whether you're in Georgetown, whether you're in St. Helena, or whether you're on Defusky or Sapelo, all part of the Gullah Geechee corridor from Wilmington, North Carolina to St. Augustine, Florida. But the bottom line, the tradition, the experience, and the knowledge is one. The way the word may be pronounced may be different depending where you are, but the experience is the same.
If you're in your room and you're laying down in your bed and it's pitch black dark and your mind is at ease, there's a very possibility that you can feel breath on your face. And a lot of times your eyes go black, so you actually don't see that energy. You can only feel the weight shifting on your bed. At that point, then your body becomes paralyzed. You can move your eyes, you can open them, you can't quite clearly see, you can breathe, but your chest gets weighted on. You are blacked out with this energy on you. But a lot of times, if there is nothing that actually interrupts this energy, then you will be a different person after your session with the hag. So you have to be aware of all the negative energies that are around you and the people that are around you, because it can be in any shape, form, or fashion.
I think my storytelling comes from just knowing the real story of real people. And I think that's where a lot of my passion is at, is telling real stories about real people. I'm a full-time filmmaker. I started my company around 2012. With Haint, I really laid deep into some of the stories that really affected me as a child. And that was that boo hag, man. They used to tell us those stories growing up about the hag riding you at night. And man, that would freak me out. And that was as a kid. And as a grown-up, like, it still kind of bothers me. So that's one of those things when you write, you want to write what you know. You want to write what you understand. Like, what can you write that's going to come across most authentic because you lived it. You can't get so caught up in just the scares. You have to have a good story. Like, you can't rely on just your jump scares and the little flickering of the lights and your music score. Like, you have to have a story that's going to stick with the audience, because that's the only way that the fear is going to stick with them. If they can see themselves in that predicament of, oh crap, that could be me. So it's all about really sucking your audience in, letting them know you're watching this movie, but you're the potential victim. And at the same time, giving the rules and the world where they can see themselves, like having a real authentic horror experience. The folks that raised you, they're not young no more. Like, they're getting older. Like, we don't want to lose those stories. We don't want to lose that culture. So I felt like our generation needs to be more responsible for continuing the culture and keeping those stories going.
I remember walking by a graveyard one day, and there was a gentleman named Joe Blunt who had recently died. So I was about 10 at the time, and I pointed to the grave and I said, hey, look, that's Joe Blunt's grave. And my cousin said, bite your finger, bite your finger. And I said, why? Because if you point at somebody's grave, the ghost is going to make your finger rot off. And I thought it was silly, but my dad always told me that when my relatives said such things, to just be quiet and go along with them. So I bit my finger and kept it moving.
I ask for the positive energies.
It's important today in this conversation that we're having that we respect this and not see it as some type of folklore or some type of fiction or something that's make-believe. This is in the experience of Gullah Geechee people that they believe in, that they firmly believe in, and probably some things about our culture and our landscape we may not always talk about publicly. By us being open and honest, 25 years ago, probably we wouldn't have this conversation because we were not in a place and space where we were celebrating or making public the awareness of this knowledge. And so even in this conversation, I hope those who listen and see it can have education, awareness, and understanding.
And no matter what you do, respect the voodoo. Respect the voodoo. Respect the voodoo. Greetings and salutations, one and all. It is another edition of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo Secrets and Recipes. Honor and respect, honor and respect, honor and respect. Brought to you by, powered, sponsored, and supported by NOIVD, New Orleans International Voodoo Day. Our third annual New Orleans International Voodoo Day in 2026 promises an inspiring and immersive experience with a diverse lineup of engaging events. Highlights include an educational symposium featuring distinguished speakers from around the world, including a delegation of scholars and spiritual leaders from Benin and Haiti, as well as art exhibitions showcasing voodoo-inspired works by talented local and international artists. The event will also feature a children's program and an Afroecology exhibit exploring the sacred nature of plants in voodoo, their role in spiritual practices, and their connection to our ancestors. The weekend will culminate in a ceremonial procession to 9 significant sites throughout the city, locations where the enslaved were brought ashore, held auction, and where they later found community and culture. This journey will begin at the transatlantic slave route to New Orleans marker on the moonwalk at the river just behind Jackson Square, and will conclude with a traditional voodoo ceremony at Congo Square, led by our local voodoo community, our Haitian voodoo community, as well as our Benin community. And additionally, visitors can participate in interactive workshops, community discussions, and opportunities to connect with practitioners and cultural experts. This multifaceted celebration offers something for everyone, creating a meaningful space to honor the past, celebrate the present, and inspire the future. And we're certainly grateful for your continued love, support, and participation in this 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, weeknights at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time platform on a social media site near you, as well as my YouTube channel, my LinkedIn, my Facebook page, and my Facebook profile, my Twitter, and wherever you all choose to share and repost this link. We also appreciate your taking the time to click the heart a few times at the bottom of the chat box, as well as utilize the emojis in the YouTube chat box and click on the dollar sign. We certainly appreciate your continued support and appreciation for this platform. And I will certainly open the mics for my beloved co hosts, Brother Joshua Nylan Tanner, Elder Reggie, known on this platform as Green Soap, Shrine of the White Cloth, and our beloved Sister Toni Val Martinez momentarily. Greetings and salutations, Mambo Sally Ann. We certainly appreciate you and thank you for stopping by. Savages and sable subjects, white fear, racism, and the demonization of Creole voodoo in New Orleans in the 19th century. The cynical and deliberately racist tone of journalists and newspapers of the late 19th century mirrored most public opinion of voodoo. White New Orleanians saw justification in their racist attitudes towards voodoo because of bizarre and dangerous reports which spoke to their phobias and racist conceptions about Black men and women, both free and enslaved. Moreover, white New Orleans newspapers navigated through a deceptive web of lies to convince its readers that voodoo posed the greatest threat to the safety of white women and children. Yet those who often gave testimonies of what they witnessed often failed to realize that they were also complicit in the sexual barbarity of Black men by attending these rituals as simply observers. Come on in, Mother Toni. Give me a second here. A September 1893 story in the Times-Picayune titled "A Voodoo Priest Terrorizes Kentucky" sought to distinguish voodoo during slavery from voodoo post-emancipation. No doubt to infer that Blacks were less harmful, and thus whites much safer when Black people were enslaved. The story reads in part, while many features of this sacred lore, so vividly described in Sir Spencer St. John's work on the sect in Louisiana and other Gulf states, will not be found faithfully produced at this period, yet it is synthetically similar to be easily recognized as part of the barbarous ceremony peculiar to the superstitious adherents of voodoo worship. Their rites, however, do not partake of those ghastly features that characterize the practices of many of the slaves imported directly from the African coast to the United States. In extrapolating the context of this story, it is easy to recognize the paternalistic maternity gripped by the writer. the paternalistic mentality gripped by the writer. While the story uses the phrase, this sacred lore, it simultaneously uses words like barbarous, ghastly, and simultaneously uses words like barbarous, ghastly, and of course, voodoo worship as racist language. Nowhere in this story is New Orleans voodoo compared favorably or unfavorably to Christianity. In fact, as the writer continues, familiar tropes of Black superhuman qualities are invoked to further white patriarchal supremacy. About the close of the war, the writer persists, a powerfully built Negro calling himself Elijah Bordeaux made his appearance in this vicinity. At the time, he appeared to be about 70 years old, though vigorous as a mule. The Times-Picayune writer further included that Elijah immediately became prominent in the community, though no one could utter his name. To this point, the writer attempted to make clear that the old man had simply tricked everyone, continuing, and I quote, before the old man had resided in the vicinity a year, miraculous powers were attributed to him by the ignorant Negroes. A few of the colored people were too intelligent to be deceived, but his influence with the majority was so great that those better informed were not anxious to assert their skepticism, unquote. An article in the New York Evening Post attempted to calm the fears of white New Orleanians by confirming that reports of voodoo rituals were tame compared to their horrible midnight orgies, which the white man is not allowed to witness. The writer goes on to state, we can only form an idea of their barbarity from the rumors that come to us, or the reports of some of their more enlightened brethren. Perhaps voodoo was not that harmful to white men after all. So in conclusion, by 1900, most Louisiana newspapers began to move away from their campaign to demonize voodoo. And this is only my opinion, we may have also began to see the shift from the spellings of VOUDOU as well as VAUDAU to a more consistent usage of VOODOO. But as I've illustrated, it already was beginning to change the meaning. Part of the reason was the massive expansion of the nation, which caused more attention to be paid to the political and economic fortunes of the Union. While voodoo still hovered around the periphery of the white consciousness, it quietly ceased to be the prevailing thought on most white men's mind. The passion to associate voodoo with witchcraft was simply a racist, patriarchal system predicated on maintaining slave subordination through fanatical fear mongering. William Adams, a former slave from Texas, noted that whites rejected what they scoffed at as Black superstitions because they did not appreciate enslaved people's relationship with God. And I quote, there am lots of folks and educated ones too that says we believes in superstition. Well, 'tis cause they don't understand. Remember, the Lord in some of his ways can be mysterious. The Bible says so. There am some things the Lord wants all folks to know, some things just the chosen few to know, and some things no one should know. Now, just because you don't know about some of the Lord's laws tain't superstition if some other person understands and believes in such. When the Lord gives such power to a person, it just comes to him, unquote. Whites saw no failure in their ministry despite preaching salvation to those in life bondage. The burgeoning Black press of the late 19th century sought to reorient its Black readership to the truth of white newspapers' disingenuous reporting of voodoo. The New Orleans Republican, New York Age, and Chicago Defender, among others, realized the harm white Louisiana newspapers were causing innocent Black men and women and became vocal opponents of anti-Black racism permeating through the pages of multiple newspapers. And while the damage had no doubt been inflicted, Blacks were made aware of the intentionally distorted reports of voodoo. That aside, what may be most remarkable is the tenacity of the spirit of voodoo to survive such a vicious onslaught. A significant amount of this is due to the descendants of enslaved Africans in Louisiana whose cultural footprint could not be erased. White Americans, like the French before them, were less threatened when they believed enslaved men and women were unlikely to revolt against their oppressors. It was only after the Haitian rebels successfully overthrew the French crown that white New Orleanians began to panic over voodoo. The paradox of religion used as a source of resistance was ignored because of their racist ideologies. So long as white New Orleanians convinced themselves that enslaved men and women of African descent were docile and compliant, they paid very little mind to voodoo. White fear, hatred, and demonization of voodoo came from a place where whites could not understand or appreciate the special bond enslaved people shared with their ancestors and homelands. Whites did not fear or hate voodoo because it stood contrary to all things European and Christian, but because of what it could represent in the hearts and minds of the enslaved, especially after the successful Haitian Revolution. And as Stephanie Meacham remarked, beyond enslavement, the continued social construction of Black bodies to be perceived as inferior was held firmly in place with the use of technologies of racism. And as I unmute my beloved co-host, I just want to add that the war then got shifted to other, you might even say newer forms of technology. One might be religion. Greetings, Elder Reggie, Brother Joshua, Sister Toni. Greetings and salutations to you all. Come on in.
Hello. You know, one of my things is, okay, when they talk about, ceremonies and sacrificing and stuff like that, I always saw communion in the Catholic Church as a sacrificial ceremony. I mean, the priest is up there, he at an altar, he come back with blood and flesh, which is creepy and cannibalistic. But then he gets everybody else to drink of the blood. And why nobody never found that strange, especially since the Bible say you're not supposed to ever consume blood. Human blood, that's an abomination, which is greater than a sin. But why nobody never associated Catholic communion as some kind of ceremony, sacrifice? Elder Reggie, you got any thoughts on that?
You raised a good point. I don't know much about Catholicism, so I'm not going to touch it, Sister Toni. I don't have anything on that one.
Well, I was raised in a Catholic church, and so I saw communion ceremonies all the time. The priest normally turned his back on the churchgoers, read something out of book, raised the cups up in the air, said some more words, put it down, drank some, ate something and turned around and offered everybody else to come and partake of the blood and the flesh.
And let's be clear, communion is pervasive in Black churches. It's a pillar of many Black churches, if not all Black churches. The formal demonstration and performance that is Communion Sunday. And that was a question that, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years old. I'm beginning to ask, why is that body, that symbolic dead body laying up in the front of the church at the end of the aisle on that table underneath that white cloth? And why are we eating of it and drinking of it every fifth Sunday? I mean, it was one of the earliest questions I had about the religion, even coming up in a Black spiritualist church that, acknowledged, the spirits and Black Hawk, but still partook in that ceremony. And what manner of witchcraft did they utilize to, beyond the savagery and the brutality for which they, enforced religion upon us once they allowed us to even access it. But what, had to be triggered or turned off in our consciousness, those of us that could remember, sacrifice, from the motherland, that we're now accepting communion without question.
I thought I was the only one who, in my mother's Baptist church, when they brought out the table, I thought for a long time that was a dead body under that white sheet because of the way the containers were arranged under the sheet. It looked like a head, a stomach, and feet to me. And even though there as a child, I wasn't allowed to take communion and I couldn't really see what was going on. And they didn't make a big thing about, like the Catholic priest saying, this is my body, this is my blood, drink it, eat it. It still was the same thing. And that had me scared because I actually thought it was a dead body under there. And I thought I was the only one. I must have was the only child, didn't know no better, and thought that was really a dead person under there.
But it was.
I know, but I'm talking about a physical person. Like
you were
Pastor Joseph was under there, died at night and was under there. But it was, and they symbolize and ceremoniously in the Catholic Church, sacrifice and consuming the blood and the body. But nobody seems to find that unusual. That's what I couldn't get over. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Why are we so demonized if we sacrifice a chicken or a goat, but they can play sacrificing a human, and that's fine?
Well, who was that in the Old Testament that God asked to sacrifice his son?
That Abraham.
Up on a mountain.
And he sent the ram, Abraham. Because sacrificing was all the way in there all the time from Cain and Abel. And according to the Bible, that's why Cain slew Abel, because Abel brought his best goat, a ram, or whatever to be sacrificed on an altar. And Cain just brought whatever he pulled out of his wheat field, and the Creator was not impressed with him and he got jealous. But that's one story of the reason, but it's not the story that I take in. But anyway,
And certainly
sacrifice.
humanity has had a relationship with harvesting, capturing, hunting, animals, and probably ceremoniously, going through that process predates, organized religions, even voodoo as we now know it. So it's also a part of, that whole, which we've talked about on other episodes, disconnecting us from our food source, disconnecting us from planting, from gardening, from hunting, from harvesting our own food. And how dare you, ask God's blessing over it, thank the ancestors, for it, offer it to something beyond the accepted institutional, God who demands that we drink of his blood and partake of his body every fifth Sunday.
Elder Reggie, did y'all do a communion in the spiritualist churches also?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, Divine Prince,
That's
Sister
what I'm
Toni,
not
Brother
familiar
Joshua,
with.
collective audience. Yeah, can you hear me?
I
Yeah,
can
we
hear
can hear you
you.
now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to bring it back a little bit to what Divine Prince was tapping on in a particular book that I had read, and I went to it. If I could read just a little passage of it, and it's Divine Prince mentioned this author several times in the past, Henry C. Castellanos. Now he wrote this book in 1895, and this is like a snapshot of the mindset of a so-called historian at that time frame. And I'll read from page 101. It's called The Voodoos, and he's spelling it Voudous. I am no believer in supernaturalism, but I am free to confess that the mystery appears at this present day as far from explanation as ever. The tribe of Voodoos, as a tribe or a class, deserves to be stamped out of existence. And with the advance of our superior civilization, it is to be hoped that the hour is not far distant when the last vestige of its degrading and dangerous influence will be forever wiped out of the existence. So now this is a snapshot of the mindset of the powers that be and the way they saw voodoo in New Orleans at that time. And it's peculiar that he did not spell it Voodoo. I am curious now, when did that spelling of voodoo became vogue and came into present, in present usage? It's just something that's gonna just send me down another rabbit hole of studying. And I appreciate Divine Prince opening that topic up that way. I didn't want to switch the energy from sacrifice, but when he made mention of that, it just brought back to my recollection of how Castellanos and others, who we got to go back to do research on voodoo from the 19th century, earlier 20th century. We have to use these people books as reference points.
Mm-hmm. And
Yes.
I think the variations in spelling speak to sort of the shifting mindset and attitude about voodoo, how it was characterized, how it was talked about, from the streets to the newspapers. And so there were, well, we're not doing that kind of voodoo. We're, with the AU, we're doing the voodoo with the OU. And we're seeing that same, argument today with people who claim, if it's not VODOU, then it's not legitimate. Or if it's somehow not Haitian, it's not legitimate, negating its West African roots, as well as its, being seeded throughout the so-called New World, from North, Central to South America. So it has transformed. It does continue to evolve. It is representative of many branches of our story, of our lineage, of our inheritance. But I think we clearly saw, a disagreement at the minimum between authors, newspapers, journalists of that day and time, as they grapple with the reality of voodoo and its demonstration. Again, I think settling on the voodoo with 4 O's and then mirroring that with, some of the comments made, about us, now being less likely to revolt or somehow now being more adaptable is why I suggested that we have to consider the political changes that were happening, the financial and cultural changes that were indeed happening during Reconstruction and even following that, but particularly the effects of religion and the growth and development of religion, as the storehouse, if you will, of Black spirituality in America. And so a lot of this then went completely underground,
Mm-hmm.
until
Yeah, Divine Prince. I like the direction you're going in right quick, because now it didn't open up my mind to VOODOO, and then when you shift to HOODOO, you could see them almost working in tandem. But that's coming back from the newspaper writers and the powers that be at that time. So now Voodoo Hoodoo, which become almost sister and brother in a sense, but that's the wording that takes on the, well, let's say the American connotation. But when you get to Africa, it's spelled different, and when you get to the islands, it's spelled different. So they almost segueing it. So when you speak of a particular version of it, you're talking about a particular people in a certain locale.
That's right.
Yep.
Go ahead, Brother Josh.
Hey, how y'all doing? Listening
Yes,
audience and Elder Reggie and Sister Toni and Divine. We just yeah, that's pretty. I'm glad you brought that up, Elder Reggie. That's pretty. I mean, that speaks to the, I guess, the linguistic, multi-linguistic influence involved in it, and the people and the oppression, and it speaks to a lot of those things. Just the forcing of amalgamating or actually environment from the environment that they was put in, depending on where they was carried to and how the voodoo was carried over to America. That does tell in the spelling. It tells in the way they I guess they looked at it as something unique, like we all do in some type of way today. I guess you could say, depending on where you're coming from. We represent New Orleans voodoo here, but it's I'm sure there's voodoo throughout America that people utilize different spellings too, in different ways, and talk of it in different ways. And I just think it's a part of our linguistic adaptation to it.
That's what I always thought. I thought it was whoever was saying it, the pronunciation. Like whoever wrote it down, whatever language they spoke, they wrote it down in that language, and that spelling for the French, the Spanish, and the English, who I don't know. But when we said it from the French, it came out to our people, us, as voodoo, and us spelling it like that.
Yeah.
Now, Sister Toni,
That's
are
the
you
way I
saying
always looked at it.
VOODOO? Sister Toni, you saying
Yeah, the VOODOO was written down because that's how it sounded when we Black New Orleanians said it to someone who was writing it down, or to ourselves.
The word of mouth. There's a lot of that was carried through word of mouth. So we all have New Orleans is it's been, it just, we have so many different influences here culturally. And I think that, that's how I've always known it too. That's how I've always heard it and seen it.
And then I found that people here do not separate the two at all.
No, they don't.
They think they the same thing. Voodoo and hoodoo is the same thing. They don't separate them.
Well, like Elder Reggie said, when you're doing the research and you're looking at the documents, there's certainly a period of time where the two coexisted historically, and certainly were being used interchangeably. I've even found some documents that suggest that the hoodoo became a more ethnic reference, particularly in the environment where Marie Laveau was seen as providing a bit of performance and entertainment for the white masses, if you will. I've recited some stories here where, St. John's Eve was going on and 12,000 people showed up, looking for the spectacle that was Marie Laveau and the Voodoos, only for them to be actually at a completely separate location, having a completely concealed and private ceremony. And that still goes on even today. What we see in Congo Square, for example, is communal. It's open in public space. Anybody can wander in, any individual and their dog can wander in during any of our ceremonies in that space. But the authentic ceremonies are often going on in private. Brother Reggie often has his ceremonies in private with his family and his members. I have my ceremonies in private with my godchildren, my initiates, but then we also participate in a communal ceremony with Lasaurus, which has an open door policy where we're all are welcome, to come and participate within your knowledge base, within the ceremony. But the real work still often goes on behind closed doors, still goes on in private. It's still done in secluded areas.
And just to touch up on what Castellano said, he did use the word superhumanism as if it was super realism, because whatever is going on in private is working. It is impressing those who are on the outside looking in, and they're really trying to unravel the mystery. Because they can't unravel the mystery, they vilify it.
Yes, that's right, Elder Reggie. If they don't understand something, they try to kill it. And if they still can't understand something else because it's just kind of unseen, they vilify it.
That's right. Yes.
So our show has come to the time for an end. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. I want to turn it over to Elder Reggie to close us out of this session.
Yeah. Thank you, Sister Toni, Brother Josh, for your opinion and showing up with us tonight. And of course, Divine Prince, another great show. But with this being August 29th, 2025, remember Katrina, August 29th, 2005, 20 years ago. And I just want to give, just a moment of grief, a moment of gratitude, a moment of not forgetting those 1,800 plus lives that was lost, unnamed, to the horrors of Hurricane Katrina. And also, I want to honor some of the great stories, some of the love that was shown to people after Katrina to help bring people back and make them whole to a degree. I just wanted to take a moment of solitude for that before I close out. I'm good. Appreciate everyone with that. Appreciate you guys. Lest we forget, the spiritual medicine of voodoo brings healing and relief from the shackles of slavery that binds the master and the slave to the same chain of social division. With that said, a hurricane or a natural disaster will bring damage to slave and master at the same time. And that's just a little tidbit to remember as humans, we walk this same journey together. With that, I say ashe, ashe, ashe. Good night, everyone, and we love you all.
Good night.
I want to acknowledge the living from Hurricane Katrina, the survivors, and particularly those who are in varying degrees of wholeness and healing. Some people are still in the struggle. Some people still have not gotten over, have not recuperated, have not reconnected with their lost loved ones, and are still challenged, with all that came with the storm. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the living, those of us who lived through it and survived it, and those who are still in the healing process. All is a blessing. Vodou.
Yes.
Let me be the one to tell you. Most of your great-grandmothers were magical women. She had an altar, but she didn't call it that. Back then, they called it prayer warrior closet or intercession room. She didn't call it Reiki. She called it laying hands. She didn't call it mediumship. She called it prophesying, or I had a dream. She didn't have a potion. She said, drink this tea and you will feel better. There is nothing new under the sun. Just reclaim what she did with more information to guide your path. Let me be the one.